Here is Steve Malzberg.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show. A couple of days ago was, hard to believe, the one-year anniversary of the shooting of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman down in Florida. And the family attended some memorial services and here in New York City and elsewhere, went on some of the TV shows. And one thing that Trayvon's mom did say was whatever the verdict is in an eventual trial, assuming there will be a trial, she will respect that verdict. They've said all along, she said that we just want a trial. Joining me now to talk about how that trial might go and where it might lead us is Dr. Jason Johnson, Senior Politics Editor for Politic365.com. And Jason, I'm thrilled we were able to set this up today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Computers are crazy, but we're good.
I'll tell you, and when they go down or whatever, we're just crippled, and that's a scary thought. But anyway, that's for another show.
Yeah.
All right. I got a feeling you and I have different opinions on this. Where do you see – first of all, let me ask you a question. Can George Zimmerman get a fair trial in the jurisdiction that the case is now located in? Alan Dershowitz said no. I tend to think no also. What do you say?
I believe in his defense attorneys, and I believe in the prosecutors. I mean, you know, his defense attorney's job is to determine if anybody on that jury seems remotely biased or knows too much about the trial. So I do think it is possible. I probably, if I was his defense attorney, I would have asked for a change of venue. But I do think it's possible for him to get a fair trial.
Okay. Let's move on from there. Do you believe that the self-defense, it's not going to be a stand your ground motion for dismissal because, as from what I've heard the lawyer say recently, he wasn't able to stand his ground. There was a scuffle, and I don't even know how you do this legally, but there's going to be a motion to dismiss based mostly on self-defense. I find that in any circumstance, especially a high-profile case, that the chances of that succeeding are going to be highly unlikely.
Right. And it seems unlikely to me because if you look at the basic facts of the case, and, you know, I'm a political science professor. I follow this case. I am not a defense attorney. But the reality is it's going to be very hard to put together a case of self-defense when you were armed and you were in your car and you were talking to the police department and they said, hey, mister, you don't need to leave your car. So, you know, self-defense sort of implies that you were attacked or you were pursued. And when you leave the safety of your car with a weapon to pursue someone who you suspect might be a burglar, self-defense, it's kind of a hard leap from that particular point.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and this is where we disagree. First of all, I'm glad you used the terminology, we don't need you to do that, because that is what they said. We don't need you to do that. The way the media has presented it after, you know, especially at the time of the crime, along with the 12-year-old pictures of Trayvon, which were misleading, was don't do it. He wasn't told not to. They said, we don't need you to do that. And what he said was, are you following him? And he said, yes. And he said, we don't need you to do that. So he didn't say, I'm in my car. And they didn't say, don't leave the car. They asked him, are you following him? He said, yes. And they said, we don't need you to do that. So let's assume then he went on to follow him a little more or didn't, and then went back to his car and was attacked. I'm just putting forth his scenario. And a struggle ensued. And we know, at least I'm convinced from the evidence I've seen on television, that the guy had his head banged into the concrete, the guy had his nose broken, the guy was screaming for help and was getting punched. Doesn't he have a right to self-defense?
Right. That's assuming that the man who's still alive is telling the truth. Look, you have one armed person and one unarmed person. The unarmed person is dead, and the guy with the gun is still alive. And consequently, you have to have some amount of skepticism as to how his story works, because at least at this particular point, George Zimmerman and his brother have not given us any reason to believe why Trayvon Martin would have unprovoked attacked him out of the blue, so much so that he felt that he had absolutely no option but to shoot him. That is the problem. There is nothing that has been said so far that's like, look, you know, this guy has an absolutely out of control history. This young man has a penchant for violence. Yes, look, he's not a perfect kid, but you don't have to be perfect to not be, you know, the victim of a murder. There's nothing George Zimmerman has said that explains why Trayvon Martin would attack him out of the blue.
Well, yeah, he was followed. Look, let's play. He was followed. Maybe he felt threatened.
Right.
And this was a misunderstanding, and he felt threatened, and he attacked him. Maybe he felt he was attacking him for his own safety. I don't know where his brother comes into it, maybe because he's been doing some speaking, and that's why you brought him up. But let's assume – I don't know that it's – first of all, everything we're talking about spells, to me, so loudly, reasonable doubt. Because as you pointed out, there's only one person left alive. It's only his story we're going to get. And he had bruises on the back of his head, which indicated he was on the bottom. He had a broken nose, which indicated he was getting beaten, which leads one to think he had a right to self-defense.
Well, not if you provoke the fight and then you're getting your butt kicked. And that's what I think is highly likely what happened. Look, you put yourself in the...
You think it's highly likely, but you can't convict a man on thinking it's highly likely.
Put yourself in the scenario of a 17-year-old kid who's walking home. He's on the phone with again, with the information that we have, he's on the phone with his girlfriend. He's saying, hey, look, I think there's somebody following me. And then he's off the phone. From that point on, we have absolutely no idea what happened, and therefore we have to look with a great deal of skepticism, because the scenario could have been George Zimmerman walks up and says, hey, how are you doing today, young man? And Trayvon turns around and attacks him viciously, or given that George Zimmerman does have a record, did have resisting arrest, did have a gun, had been aggressive, it's very possible that he provoked Trayvon Martin. He said, hey, who are you, kid? Pushed him. What are you doing in this neighborhood? We've had robberies. Who are you? Where are you from? Gets in his way, and then a scuffle begins.
Well, so but that's such speculation, and I guess that'll be up for a jury to decide, but ultimately the jury will be told reasonable doubt. And if we don't know what happened, but yet we know, if all we know is that Zimmerman was taking a beating, we may never know how it took place unless we believe Zimmerman's case, his story. So to me it's such reasonable doubt that there's no way they could convict him if they're being fair. I'll give you the last say here.
I think it's perfectly easy to say that he was guilty because, look, if you leave the car and you're pursuing somebody with a gun and then you provoke them, you can't claim self-defense. Had he stayed back, had he waited for the police, if he had run away, if he had waved the gun and said, stay away from me, kid, all of those things would have made his case more believable. But I think he was an overzealous guy, and he got in trouble, and he killed a kid.
All right, Dr. Jason Johnson, I hope you'll come back. We could talk about this, and I'm sure there are plenty of other issues we could probably disagree on as well.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much. All right, folks. I did give Jason the last word, but I'll just say that according to Alan Dershowitz, who I did ask this about, the fact that he got out of the car and looked and pursued does not take away the claim of self-defense, but we shall see. All right, when we come back, Stephen Brill will join us to talk about health care and the cost of health care and why it is what it is on the Steve Malzberg Show.
The Steve Malzberg Show.